The blizzard didn't just howl. It screamed, tearing through the Montana peaks like a demon demanding a soul. Lying half buried in a drift of white death, Isabella Sterling had stopped shivering hours ago. That was the bad sign. The warmth spreading through her limbs was a lie. A final lullaby before the end. She had run from a monster in the city, only to be caught by the beast of the mountain winter. But just as her eyes fluttered shut, surrendering to the dark, a shadow eclipsed the moon. A massive shape, more bare than man, blocked out the wind. She felt rough leather, the heat of a lantern, and heard a voice that rumbled like an earthquake. "Not today, little bird. Not on my mountain." This is your narrator, Marcus, from Frontier Rescue Stories. If you love tales of the Old West, of survival, redemption, rugged justice, and romance that blooms against all odds, you have come to the right place. Before we dive into this journey, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button, share this video, and smash subscribe. Your support helps us stir up the algorithm and bring these campfire tales to a larger audience. Also, I love hearing from you, so drop a comment down below and let me know which part of the world you are tuning in from today. Isabella didn't remember the crash. She remembered the terror of the flight, the frantic galloping of the horse. She had stolen from the stables of the man who thought he owned her. She remembered the biting wind that turned her tears into ice on her cheeks, and the terrifying realization that the trail she had chosen was no trail at all, but a deer path disappearing into the savage heart of the Rockies. Then the world had spun, a slip, a scream, the sickening crunch of wood against stone, and then silence. Now that silence was broken by the crunching of heavy boots on packed snow. Caleb Thorne stopped, his breath pluming in the frigid air like dragon smoke. He was a man carved from the granite of these very mountains, 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and scar tissue, wrapped in buffalo hides and solitude. He had come out to check his trap line before the storm swallowed the valley whole. But something else had caught his attention. It wasn't the scent of pine or the musk of elk. It was the smell of fear, or perhaps the metallic tang of fresh blood. He narrowed his eyes, scanning the ravine below. Most men would see nothing but shadows and snow, but Caleb saw the broken branch of a pine, the unnatural mound at the base of the cliff. He grunted, shifting the weight of his rifle. He didn't like visitors. Visitors brought trouble, and trouble was the one thing he had moved up here to escape 10 years ago. But the code of the high country was simple. You don't leave a living thing to freeze. He descended the slope with the sure-footed grace of a mountain goat, ignoring the biting wind that tried to push him back. When he reached the wreckage, he saw the horse first. It was gone, its suffering ended by the fall. Then he saw the bundle of rags half buried in the drift. "Fool," he muttered, his voice raspy from disuse. "City folk, always running where they don't belong." He brushed the snow away with a gloved hand the size of a shovel. When the face was revealed, Caleb paused. It was a woman. Her skin was marble pale, her lips a dangerous shade of blue. A tangle of raven-black hair was frozen to her cheek. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll someone had carelessly tossed off the edge of the world. He pulled off his heavy glove and pressed 2 fingers to her neck. A flutter, faint, erratic, like a hummingbird trapped in a cage. She was alive, but for how long? Caleb didn't waste time with questions. He scooped her up in his arms, the buffalo coat swallowing her small frame. She weighed nothing. It unsettled him. He was used to hauling elk quarters and timber. This felt like carrying a ghost. He turned back toward the slope, the wind picking up, screaming now, and trying to claim the prize he had just stolen from it. The climb back to the cabin was brutal. The snow was knee-deep and rising, the temperature dropping with every minute the sun faded. Caleb shielded her face with his body, taking the brunt of the gale. He could feel her coldness seeping through his layers, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Why was a woman dressed in fine silk and a thin wool coat riding alone in the high pass in December? There was a story there, and Caleb hated stories. Stories meant complications. He reached the cabin just as the storm broke in full fury. It was a sturdy structure, built of hand-hewn logs that had withstood avalanches and bear attacks. He kicked the door open, a gust of wind blowing out the lantern inside, and slammed it shut against the night. The sudden silence of the interior was deafening. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers. Caleb strode across the room, laying the woman on his own bed, a frame of pine covered in furs. He quickly built up the fire, feeding it dry cedar until the flames roared and cracked, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He turned back to her. She hadn't moved. She was soaking wet, her clothes freezing to her skin. If he didn't warm her up, she'd be dead by morning. Hypothermia was a thief. It stole the mind first, then the heart. "Forgive me, ma'am," he grumbled to the empty room, "but modesty won't save your life tonight." With clumsy, trembling hands, not from cold, but from a hesitation he hadn't felt in years, he began to cut away the frozen laces of her dress. The fabric was expensive, imported stuff he hadn't seen since he left civilization. Underneath, her skin was ice-cold to the touch. He worked quickly, stripping her of the wet garments and wrapping her in thick wool blankets he had heated by the fire. He filled a canteen with warm water and lifted her head. "Drink," he commanded softly, though she was unconscious. He tipped a little water between her lips. She coughed, a weak, hacking sound, but she swallowed. Caleb pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, watching her. He was a sentinel in his own home, guarding a stranger. He looked at her face, really looked at her, for the first time. She was beautiful, even in this state. High cheekbones, lashes that cast long shadows on her pale skin. There was a bruise forming on her temple, dark and angry. He leaned back, rubbing his bearded jaw. Who was she? And who was she running from? You don't ride a horse to death in a blizzard unless the devil himself is chasing you. He stood up and walked to the window, peering out through a crack in the shutters. The world outside was a swirling vortex of white. No tracks would survive this night. If anyone was following her, they were either dead or turned back. For now, they were safe. But safety was an illusion in the mountains. Caleb knew that better than anyone. He looked back at the woman in his bed. She stirred, a small whimper escaping her lips. "Please," she whispered, her voice a broken shard of glass. "Please, don't let him take me." Caleb's jaw tightened. He walked back to the fire and threw another log on, sending sparks flying up the chimney. He didn't know who he was, but a dark, protective anger flared in his chest, an old, dangerous feeling he thought he had buried with his past. "Rest easy, little bird," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Nobody's taking you anywhere. Not while I'm breathing." He settled back into the chair, his rifle across his knees. It was going to be a long night. The mountain man and the city girl, trapped in a box of wood and stone while the world tried to kill them. It was the beginning of something. Caleb just prayed it wasn't the beginning of the end. Isabella floated in a dark void. Sometimes it was freezing, a cold so deep it burned. Other times she was consumed by fire, trapped in a burning house while shadows danced around her. Through it all there was a presence, a mountain, a deep rumbling voice that anchored her when she felt she was drifting away. She would feel a rough, calloused hand on her forehead, cool, gentle, contrasting with the heat of her fever. She wanted to lean into that hand, to beg it to stay, but the darkness always pulled her back down. She woke to the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat. Her eyes snapped open, panic seizing her instantly. She tried to sit up, but her body screamed in protest. Every muscle felt bruised. Her head throbbed, and her limbs were heavy as lead. She gasped, collapsing back onto the pillow. "Easy now," a voice came from the corner. "You try to run before you can walk, you'll just fall." Isabella turned her head, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Sitting in a rough-hewn chair by the fireplace was a giant. That was the only word her terrified mind could supply. He was massive, his broad shoulders filling out a flannel shirt that looked strained at the seams. A thick dark beard covered half his face, and his hair hung long and wild around his shoulders. He was sharpening a knife, a blade that looked large enough to dress. A buffalo with slow, rhythmic strokes. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Isabella pulled the furs up to her chin, realizing with a jolt of shame that she was not wearing her own clothes. She was wrapped in an oversized wool shirt that swallowed her whole. Where am I?" she rasped. Her throat felt like she had swallowed sand. "Who are you?" The man stopped sharpening the knife. He looked up, and Isabella found herself pinned by a pair of eyes that were startlingly clear, the color of river stones, under swift water. They weren't cruel eyes, but they were guarded, ancient. "You're in my cabin," he said, standing up. The room seemed to shrink as he rose. "High Sierras. Found you half dead in the ravine 3 days ago. Name's Caleb." 3 days? Isabella whispered. The memory of the flight came rushing back. The ball, the announcement, the cruel smile of Baron Vance, the desperate escape. "Oh God, he'll find me, I have to go." She tried to swing her legs out of bed again, driven by pure adrenaline. As soon as her feet touched the wooden floor, her knees buckled. She didn't hit the ground. Caleb crossed the room with impossible speed for a man of his size, catching her effortlessly before she fell. "I told you," he grunted, effortless lifting her and depositing her back onto the mattress. "You ain't going nowhere. You got a fever, broken ribs likely, and you're weak as a kitten. Outside that door is 5 feet of snow and wolves that are hungrier than I am. Leaving is suicide." Isabella looked up at him, trembling. Up close, he smelled of pine resin, wood smoke, and something earthy, like the forest itself. He didn't smell like the cologned, polished men of the city who hid their cruelty behind silk vests. He smelled dangerous, yes, but honest.
"He'll kill me," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "If I stay, if he finds me."
Caleb stepped back, crossing his massive arms. "Who is he?" Isabella looked away, staring into the fire. "Baron Vance, the cattle baron." Caleb let out a low whistle. "Vance, huh? You aim high for enemies, little lady. He owns half the valley below." "He thinks he owns me," Isabella spat, a flash of fire cutting through her fear. "My father, he sold me to him, to cover gambling debts. I was to be his wife, his property." She looked back at Caleb, her chin trembling but held high. "I would rather freeze in your snow than warm his bed." Caleb watched her for a long moment. He saw the steel beneath the silk. She wasn't just a damsel, she was a fighter. He respected that. "Well," Caleb said, turning back to the fire to stir a pot hanging over the flames. "Vance's men won't make it up the pass, not with the drifts this high. You're safe here for now." He ladled a thick, dark stew into a wooden bowl and brought it to her. "Eat. It's elk. Not what you're used to, I reckon, but it'll put blood back in your veins." Isabella took the bowl with shaking hands. She took a hesitant spoonful. It was rich, savory, and hot. She hadn't realized how starving she was until the first bite hit her stomach. She ate voraciously, unladylike, wiping the broth from her lip with the back of her hand. Caleb watched her eat, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk touching his lips beneath the beard. "Slow down. You'll make yourself sick." "Thank you," she said softly, lowering the bowl. "For saving me. You didn't have to." "No," Caleb agreed. "I didn't. But I don't like seeing things go to waste. Especially pretty things." He said it without lechery, just a matter-of-fact statement, like observing a sunset. The next few days were a blur of recovery. Isabella learned the rhythm of the cabin. It was a small world, intimate and intense. She watched Caleb work. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. She saw him carefully chop wood, mend his gear, and check her fever with a touch that was surprisingly gentle. She felt like an intruder in a bear's den. The cabin was filled with the artifacts of a solitary life. Furs stretching on racks, jars of herbs, a well-oiled rifle over the mantel. There were no mirrors, no frills. It was a place of survival. One evening, while the wind howled outside, Isabella managed to stand and walk to the table without falling. Caleb was repairing a snowshoe, the leather strips weaving through his fingers. "I can cook," she said suddenly. "I mean, I can try. I want to be useful. I can't just lay in your bed and eat your food." Caleb looked up. "You ever skinned a rabbit?" Isabella blanched. "No." "Ever chopped kindling?" "No." "Ever hauled water from a frozen creek?" She shook her head, feeling foolish. "I can embroider. I can play the piano. I speak French." Caleb snorted, a deep, rumbling sound. "Well, if a French piano falls on us, I'll be sure to call you. Until then, you rest. That's your job." Isabella felt a flush of irritation. "I am not useless, Mr. Thorne. I survived the blizzard, didn't I?" "You got lucky," Caleb corrected her, his eyes narrowing. "Don't confuse luck with skill. Out here, the mountain doesn't care if you speak French. It just cares if you can keep your blood warm." He stood up, towering over her. The tension in the room spiked. It wasn't fear anymore. It was friction, two different worlds colliding in a 12-by-12 cabin. "Teach me," Isabella challenged, meeting his gaze. "Teach me how to survive. If I am to leave when the snow melts, I need to know." Caleb stared at her. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the fire in her hazel eyes. She reminded him of a wild mare he had once spent weeks trying to break, only to realize she was never meant to be ridden. "Fine," Caleb said, tossing the snowshoe onto the table. "But don't come crying to me when you break a nail. Tomorrow we start with the fire. If you can't keep the fire, you die." Lesson 1. Isabella nodded, her heart racing. Lesson 1. Caleb watched her turn and limp back to the bed. He felt a strange tightening in his chest. He had been alone for 10 years. He liked the silence, but watching her silhouette against the firelight, he realized with a sinking feeling that the silence had been lonely, and that was a dangerous realization for a man who had sworn off attachments. The snow was deep outside, trapping them together. The thaw was months away, and in this tiny cabin, something was beginning to melt that had been frozen for a very long time. Weeks bled into a month. The harsh bite of January settled over the mountain, sealing the cabin in a world of white and gray. But inside, the air had changed. The awkward tension between the mountain man and the city girl had shifted into a tentative, unspoken partnership. Isabella was learning. Her hands, once soft and smelling of rosewater, were now calloused and smelled of wood smoke. She learned that dried cedar bark caught a spark better than pine. She learned how to skin a rabbit without retching, though she still closed her eyes at the first cut. She learned that silence didn't always need to be filled with chatter. Caleb watched her transformation with a begrudging respect that was slowly turning into admiration. One evening, the fire crackled warmly as Isabella mended a tear in Caleb's spare coat. She sat in the rocking chair, the needle flashing in the firelight. "You have a scar," she said softly, breaking the quiet. She didn't look up, but Caleb stiffened. He was cleaning his rifle, a ritual he performed every night. "I have many scars, Isabella," he grunted. He had started using her name a week ago. It sounded strange on his tongue, too elegant for this rugged place. "The one on your shoulder," she clarified, glancing at him. "I saw it when you were chopping wood today. It's circular, a bullet hole." Caleb paused, the rag in his hand stilling on the metal barrel. He looked into the flames, his expression darkening. "Old souvenir, from the war." Isabella stopped sewing. "You were a soldier?" "I was a lot of things," Caleb muttered. "None of them good." He sighed, setting the rifle down. He looked at her, and for the first time he let the guard down just a fraction. "I fought for the Union, saw things, did things that don't wash off. After the war, I came back home to find my wife and daughter gone. Cholera." Isabella's breath hitched. "I'm so sorry, Caleb." "I didn't handle it well," he continued, his voice rougher than usual. "Drank, fought, ended up nearly killing a man in a bar fight. Realized I was the danger. So I came up here, where I couldn't hurt anyone, where the only thing I had to fight was the cold." He looked at her, his eyes vulnerable in a way she had never seen. "I thought I was done with the world. Then you fell into my ravine." Isabella felt a tear trace a path down her cheek. She stood up and crossed the small distance between them. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand on his bearded cheek. He flinched, like a wild animal unsure of a human's touch, but he didn't pull away. "You're not a danger, Caleb," she whispered. "You saved me. You are the most gentle man I have ever known." Caleb closed his eyes, leaning imperceptibly into her palm. Her touch was fire and ice, waking up parts of his soul he thought were dead. "Isabella," he groaned, his voice a low rumble. "You don't know what you're saying. I'm a savage, a hermit. You're light. You belong in a mansion, not a shack." "I belong where I am safe," she said fiercely. "And I have never felt safer than I do right here." The air between them crackled, charged with a sudden, overwhelming electricity. Caleb opened his eyes, staring at her lips. He wanted to kiss her. God, he wanted to kiss her more than he wanted his next breath. But he held back. He was a protector, not a predator. He gently took her hand and lowered it from his face, squeezing her fingers before letting go. "It's late," he rasped, standing up abruptly. "We need wood for the morning." He grabbed his coat and stormed out into the night, leaving Isabella standing by the fire, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She knew then, with terrifying clarity, that she wasn't just hiding from Vance anymore. She was falling in love with the mountain man. The next morning brought a shift in the weather and a shift in their reality. The wind changed direction, bringing a slightly warmer breeze from the south. The thaw was beginning. Caleb was quiet all morning, checking the perimeter of the cabin. When he returned, his face was grim. "Snow's packing down," he said, hanging his rifle by the door. "Crust is hard enough to walk on. Horses can make it up the lower pass now." Isabella froze, the dishcloth in her hand dropping to the table. Do you think he's coming?" "Men like Vance don't give up property," Caleb said, his voice flat. "He's had a month to stew on it, a month to hire trackers." He walked over to the table and placed a heavy revolver on the wood. "Do you know how to use one of these?" Isabella stared at the black metal. It looked cold and lethal. "No." "Today you learn," Caleb said. "Lesson 2. They spent the afternoon behind the cabin. Caleb set up bottles on a stump. He taught her how to hold the heavy weapon, how to account for the kick, how to squeeze the trigger, not pull it. Isabella was terrified of the gun, but she was more terrified of the alternative. On her third try, she shattered a bottle. "Good," Caleb nodded, his face serious. "Again. Keep your eyes open. Don't flinch." "Why are you doing this now?" she asked, lowering the gun, her arms aching. Caleb looked at the horizon, scanning the tree line. "Because the birds stopped singing an hour ago. Something spooked them." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. "They're here, aren't they?" "Not yet," Caleb said, his eyes hard as flint. "But they're close." He turned to her, placing his large hands on her shoulders. "Listen to me, Isabella. If trouble starts, you get inside. You bar the door. You don't open it for anyone but me. Do you understand?" "What about you?" she asked, gripping his coat. "Caleb, there could be dozens of them." "I have the high ground," Caleb said, a dark, grim smile touching his lips. "And this is my mountain. They might bring numbers, but they don't know the land. I do." He pulled her into a hug then, fierce and brief. He smelled of gun oil and determination. "I won't let them take you," he vowed into her hair. "I promised you. Not while I'm breathing." Isabella clung to him, burying her face in his chest. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Please." Caleb pulled away, looking at her one last time before grabbing his rifle and heading into the trees. Isabella watched him disappear into the forest, a lone shadow against the white snow. She turned and ran back to the cabin, barring the door, the heavy revolver feeling like a dead weight in her pocket. The peaceful interlude was over. The world had found them. The silence of the forest was different now. It wasn't the peaceful hush of winter slumber. It was the tense, holding breath silence of a predator waiting to strike. Caleb lay flat on his stomach on a ridge overlooking the only trail leading up to the cabin. He was covered in a white sheet, invisible against the snowdrift. His breath was slow, controlled. Through the scope of his rifle he saw them. 4 riders. They were struggling through the deep snow, their horses blowing hard. At the lead was a man in a black coat with silver buttons, Baron Vance. Even from this distance, Caleb could see the arrogance in his posture. Flanking him were 3 hired guns, men with low-brimmed hats and rifles resting across their saddles. 4, Caleb whispered. Manageable. He didn't want to kill them. Killing brought the law, and the law was complicated. But he needed to send a message. He shifted his aim, targeting a pine branch heavy with snow directly above the lead rider. Crack. The rifle shot echoed like thunder in the valley. The branch sheared off, dumping a massive pile of snow directly onto Vance and his horse. The beast reared, throwing the Baron into a drift. The other horses panicked, dancing in the deep snow. "Turn back!" Caleb's voice boomed from the rocks, amplified by the valley walls. "This is private land. No trespassers." Down below, Vance scrambled to his feet, his face red with rage and cold. He pulled a pistol and fired blindly up at the cliffs. "I know she's up there, you hillbilly filth. Give me the girl and we leave you alive." "She ain't yours to take," Caleb shouted back. "Turn around, Vance, last warning." "Get him!" Vance screamed at his men. "Burn him out! $500 to the man who brings me his head." The 3 hired guns dismounted and scattered, taking cover behind trees. They began to return fire, bullets chipping the rock near Caleb's head. "Have it your way," Caleb muttered. He rolled back from the ridge and slipped into the trees. He wasn't going to fight them in a shootout. He was going to hunt them. Inside the cabin, Isabella huddled in the corner, the revolver clutched in both hands. She heard the distant pops of gunfire, sounding like firecrackers. Each shot made her flinch. Is he dead? Is he hurt? The waiting was agony. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the window. Isabella gasped, raising the gun.
"Open up, sweet thing," a rough voice sneered from the other side of the door. "We know you're in there. Daddy Vance wants a word."
One of the hired guns had flanked around. He kicked the door. The heavy bar held, but the wood groaned.
"Go away!"
Isabella screamed, surprised by the strength in her own voice.
"I have a gun!"
"Ooh, a gun!" The man laughed. "I'm shivering. Open up, or I'll burn this shack down with you in it." Isabella looked at the fireplace. Then she looked at the pot of boiling water Caleb had left on the hook. An idea, desperate and dangerous, formed in her mind. The door shook with another violent kick. A splinter of wood flew across the room. He was breaking in. Isabella dragged the heavy table across the floor, jamming it against the door. She grabbed the pot of water with a thick rag, her hands trembling. "Last chance, girlie." The wood around the lock shattered. The door swung open a few inches, stopped by the table. A dirty hand reached in, grappling for the table leg to shove it aside. Isabella didn't hesitate. She threw the boiling water through the crack, aiming for the hand and the face she could glimpse through the gap. A scream of pure agony tore through the air. The man stumbled back, clutching his face. "My eyes! She burned my eyes!" Isabella slammed the door shut and shoved the table back into place, her chest heaving. She had hurt a man. She felt sick, but she also felt a fierce primal pride. "I am not a victim. Not anymore." Outside, the scream alerted Caleb. He was moving through the woods like a ghost. He had already disabled two of the gunmen, one with a warning shot that grazed his arm, sending him fleeing, and another caught in one of Caleb's snare traps, hanging upside down and cursing. Hearing the scream from the cabin, Caleb's blood ran cold. Isabella. He abandoned his stealth. He broke into a run, crashing through the brush. He emerged into the clearing just as Vance, seeing his men falling apart, decided to take matters into his own hands. The Baron was standing by the cabin window, holding a lit torch. "Come out, Isabella," Vance roared. "Or roast." "Vance!" Caleb bellowed, charging across the clearing. Vance turned, dropping the torch. He raised his pistol. Caleb didn't stop. He didn't dodge. He was a freight train of rage. Vance fired. A puff of dust exploded from Caleb's buffalo coat, high on the shoulder. Caleb barely flinched. He tackled the Baron, driving him into the snow. The pistol flew from Vance's hand. They rolled, a tangle of limbs in fury. Vance was younger, but Caleb was stronger, hardened by a decade of fighting the elements. But Vance was dirty. He pulled a hidden knife from his boot and slashed at Caleb's face. Caleb jerked back, a thin line of red appearing on his cheekbone. He grabbed Vance's wrist, twisting it with a sickening crunch. Vance screamed, dropping the knife. Caleb hauled him up by his lapels and slammed him against the rough logs of the cabin wall. He cocked his fist back, ready to deliver a blow that would end it. "Do it!" Vance spat, blood on his teeth. "Kill me! You'll hang for it, Mountain Man! I have friends in the capital. You'll never be free!" Caleb's fist hovered. He was breathing hard, the adrenaline coursing through him. He wanted to end this. He wanted to crush the threat. "Caleb, no!" The cabin door creaked open. Isabella stood there, the revolver in her hand, but it was pointed at the ground. Her eyes were wide, pleading. "Don't kill him," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "He's not worth your soul." Caleb looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes. Not fear of Vance, but fear of what Caleb might become. He looked back at the Baron, a pathetic broken man in the snow. Caleb exhaled, the rage draining out of him, leaving him exhausted. He released Vance, letting him slump to the ground. "Get up," Caleb growled. "Take your men, take your horses. If I ever see you on this mountain again, I won't be so neighborly." Vance scrambled back, clutching his broken wrist. He looked at Isabella, then at the giant standing beside her. He saw the look that passed between them, a look of absolute, unbreakable unity. He knew he had lost. "You're a fool, Isabella," Vance spat, retreating toward his horse. "You're trading a palace for a hovel." "I'm trading a prison for a home," she replied coldly. Vance mounted his horse awkwardly and signaled to his remaining men, the blinded one groaning. the others battered and bruised. They limped away down the trail, a defeated procession disappearing into the trees. Caleb stood watching them until they were gone. Then he turned to Isabella. He clutched his shoulder where the bullet had hit. "You're hurt," she cried, dropping the gun and running to him. "Just a scratch." Caleb winced, though his face was pale. Thick coat slowed it down. He looked at her, seeing the fierce determination in her face. "You burned that man?" "I boiled him," she corrected, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Lesson 3, improvise. Caleb threw his head back and laughed, a loud, joyous sound that echoed off the peaks. He wrapped his good arm around her, pulling her close. "God, woman, you really are a mountain girl now." "I had a good teacher," she whispered, leaning her head against his chest. The danger had passed. The silence returned to the mountain, but it wasn't lonely anymore. It was the silence of peace. The aftermath of the raid brought a quiet intimacy to the cabin that hadn't existed before. The external threat was gone, driven back to the valley, but it had left something behind, a clarity. There were no more secrets, no more guest and host. There was just Caleb and Isabella. Isabella tended to Caleb's shoulder. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of the deltoid, missing the bone and artery. It was painful, but it would heal. As she cleaned the wound with whiskey and stitched it with a steady hand, Caleb watched her. "You have a steady hand," he murmured, gritting his teeth against the sting. "I had to learn fast," she replied softly, tying off the thread. "There. It will scar, I'm afraid." "Add it to the collection." Caleb shrugged. He reached out, catching her hand before she could pull away. His thumb traced the calluses on her palm. "You saved my life today, Isabella. If you hadn't come out that door—" "You would have killed him," she finished, "and then they would have come for you." "Maybe," Caleb admitted. "But I wasn't thinking about me. I was thinking about keeping you safe." "I am safe," she said, looking into his eyes. "Caleb, She hesitated. The words hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. She was a city girl, a socialite. He was a recluse living on the edge of the world. Logic dictated they should part ways when the snow melted. But logic had no place in this cabin anymore. "The snow is melting," Caleb said, his voice low. "Pass will be fully clear in a week. You can go back. Not to Vance, but to the city. Find a new life." Isabella pulled her hand away, standing up and walking to the window. The sun was setting, painting the snow in hues of pink and gold. "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" Caleb looked at her back. He wanted to scream no. He wanted to tell her that the thought of this cabin without her made his chest ache more than the bullet wound. But he was a man who believed he was broken. He believed she deserved better than a life of chopping wood and skinning game. "I want you to be happy," he said simply. "This is a hard life, Isabella. It's cold. It's lonely. It's dangerous. You weren't made for this." Isabella turned around, her eyes flashing. "Stop telling me what I was made for. First my father, then Vance, now you. Everyone thinks they know who Isabella Sterling is. Everyone thinks she's a delicate flower that needs a hothouse." She crossed the room, grabbing his good shoulder. "Look at me, Caleb Thorne. Look at my hands. Look at my eyes. Do you see a delicate flower, or do you see the woman who threw boiling water in a gunman's face to save you?" Caleb looked. He saw the fire in her. He saw the strength. He saw the woman he loved. "I see a warrior," he whispered. "Then stop trying to send me away," she pleaded, her voice breaking. Unless you don't want me." Caleb let out a groan, a sound of defeat and surrender. He stood up, towering over her, and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. "Not want you?" he rasped. "Isabella, I wake up every morning thanking God for that blizzard. I look at you, and I see the only thing in this world that makes sense. I love you. I love you so much it scares me." Isabella let out a sob of relief. She reached up, weaving her fingers into his long hair, and pulled his face down to hers. "I love you, Caleb," she whispered against his lips. "I don't want the city. I don't want the parties or the silk dresses. I want this. I want us." He kissed her then. It wasn't the tentative kiss of a suitor. It was the claiming kiss of a man who had found his other half. It was passionate, rough with beard and need, and tender with promise. The fire crackled in the hearth, witnessing the forging of a bond stronger than any mountain stone. 2 years later, the spring sun was warm on the porch of the cabin. The snow had retreated to the highest peaks, leaving the valley a lush, vibrant green. Wildflowers, bluebells, and paintbrushes dotted the meadow. Isabella sat on the rocking chair, a basket of peas in her lap. She was shelling them, humming a tune, a French lullaby she used to play on the piano, now repurposed for the mountains. She wore a simple calico dress, and her hair was in a loose braid. She looked radiant, her skin kissed by the sun. From the edge of the woods, a figure emerged. Caleb walked with a slight limp, a reminder of an old fall, but his stride was strong. He carried a string of trout in one hand and his rifle in the other. He smiled when he saw her. It was a full, easy smile, one that reached his eyes and stayed there. The shadows of the past were gone, burned away by the warmth of the life they had built.
Good catch?
Isabella called out. Best in the creek, Caleb replied, walking up the steps. He hung the fish on a hook and leaned his rifle against the wall. He came to her, leaning down to kiss her cheek. How is he? Isabella smiled, looking down at the bundle strapped to her chest in a soft sling. A baby, barely 3 months old, slept soundly against her heart. He had a tuft of black hair like his mother and the sturdy build of his father.
Sleeping like a bear in winter,
she whispered. Caleb reached out, one large finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. The little boy stirred, gripping Caleb's finger with a tiny, strong hand. Little Jacob, Caleb murmured. He's getting strong. He has your grip, Isabella laughed. Caleb sat on the step at her feet, looking out over the valley. It was his world, his mountain, but it wasn't lonely anymore. You know, Caleb said, looking back at her, I used to think this mountain was a place to hide, a place to wait for the end. And now? Isabella asked, her hand resting on his shoulder. Caleb took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Now it's the only place I want to begin. Isabella smiled, looking at the man who had saved her, and the son they had created. She thought of the girl who had crashed in the snow, terrified and alone. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. She belonged to the mountain, and the mountain belonged to her. Welcome home, Caleb, she said softly. I am home, Belle, he replied. I am home. The sun dipped below the peaks, casting long purple shadows across the valley. But inside the cabin, and inside their hearts, the light remained. What an incredible journey of survival and love. From the freezing depths of a blizzard to the warmth of a new family, Caleb and Isabella proved that love can bloom even in the harshest winters. If this story warmed your heart, please hit that like button. It truly helps us share these tales with more people. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Frontier Rescue Stories and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new adventure. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Was it Isabella standing up to the Baron or Caleb realizing he wasn't alone anymore? Let me know below. And if you have an idea for our next story, drop a suggestion. Check out this playlist on the screen for more stories of mountain men, brave women, and frontier romance. Until next time, keep your fire burning and your heart open. Stay safe, friends.